Get this old beggar out of my house before he ruins the party, my husband snapped, shoving my dad toward the door. I froze as the man who raised me stumbled onto the porch. Greg smirked like he'd won. He had no idea I was done letting him humiliate us. I'm Chloe. I'm 34, and for most of my marriage, I was the quiet one. The one who kept the books balanced, the bills paid, the peace intact. I worked from home as a freelance bookkeeper, which sounded boring to Greg's family, but it kept us steady when Greg spent money like applause could pay rent. I grew up with a father who fixed engines with cracked hands and a tired back. He was a retired mechanic by the time I got married, but he still moved like a man who never learned how to sit still when somebody needed help. He gave me everything he could, even when it meant going without himself. Greg and his family never saw that. They saw old boots, simple shirts, and a truck that rattled when it started. To them, my dad was an embarrassment. To me, he was the reason I knew what love looked like. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. I knew how to stay quiet long enough to learn exactly where the truth was buried. If you've ever felt underestimated because of where you started, hit that subscribe button. I want to hear your story in the comments. Your background is your strength, not a weakness. Click Hype to join a community of people who prove them wrong. Let's go. The night everything broke was the night Greg hosted a dinner party for his colleagues. He'd just gotten a promotion he acted like he earned through genius, though I knew how many favors, polished lies, and loud lunches went into it. Our house smelled like expensive candles and overcooked steak. Greg had been pacing for hours, fixing napkins, checking the wine labels, barking at me about glass placement like we were hosting royalty. "Don't let your side of the family show up and make this." "Weird," he said, while straightening his tie in the hallway mirror. I remember staring at him and saying, "My side of the family is one person." He gave me that look, the one that always meant he thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. "Exactly," he said. Then the doorbell rang. I knew it was my dad before I opened it. He always knocked twice after the bell, gentle but sure. He stood there in his work clothes, a little sawdust still clinging to his sleeve, holding a wooden clock in both hands. It was beautiful. Dark polished oak, hand-carved numbers, tiny details around the edge that looked like braided rope. "Anniversary gift," he said with a shy smile. "I know I'm early by a few days, but I wanted to drop it off before you got busy." Before I could answer, Greg stepped in front of me. He looked my father up and down like he was inspecting trash left on the curb. "What are you doing here?" Greg asked. My dad's smile faded. "Just dropping something off for Chloe." Greg wrinkled his nose. "You're stinking up the porch." I felt my face go hot. "Greg, stop," I said. But he didn't. He leaned closer to my dad and said, "You pathetic beggar. You really thought you could show up tonight looking like that?" My father tightened his grip on the clock. "I'm not here for your party," he said quietly. "I came to see my daughter." Greg put a hand on his chest and shoved him backward, hard. My dad lost his footing and hit the railing. Then Greg grabbed the clock from his hands and threw it onto the lawn. It shattered in the grass. I can still hear it. Sharp. Final. Worse than that was the silence after. A few of Greg's guests had drifted into the foyer. They saw all of it. My father looked at the broken pieces but didn't bend down. He just stood there, breathing slow, like if he moved too quickly the hurt might spill out. Greg slammed the door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned close enough for me to smell whiskey on his breath. "If you go outside to help him," he whispered, "don't come back in." I wish I could say I ran to my father anyway. I didn't. Not in that second. I stood there with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then Greg smiled and walked back to his guests like nothing had happened. That was the moment something inside me stopped begging for this marriage to be decent. I followed him into the dining room because shock can make you move like a machine. Plates clinked, chairs scraped. The soft music in the background felt cruel. Greg raised his wine glass and laughed like he was charming. "Sorry about that," he told his coworkers. "My wife's family is financially illiterate, so boundaries aren't really their thing." A few people gave uncomfortable little smiles. One man looked down at his plate. Greg kept going. "You help people once, they think your house is their house." Then he glanced at me. "Chloe, dessert?" I served cheesecake, with my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped a plate. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said his joke was disgusting. They just ate. That was one of the hardest lessons of my life. Humiliation gets louder when other people decide to stay comfortable. The next morning, Greg's mother called before I'd even had coffee. I put her on speaker by mistake, and maybe that was for the best. "You need to cut that man off," she said without greeting me. "He's trailer trash, Chloe. He'll ruin Greg's image if you let him keep showing up." I looked at Greg, who was scrolling on his phone at the kitchen counter. "Are you hearing this?" I asked. He didn't even look guilty. He shrugged. "She's right." I stared at him. "That's my father." "And I'm your husband," he said. "Start acting like it." That day I called my dad. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded normal, which somehow hurt more. I apologized. I cried. He let me. Then he said, "You didn't throw me out, sweetheart. He did." I asked if he was okay. He said, "I'm disappointed in him, not in you." I sat on the floor after that call and cried until I had no tears left. Then something changed. 3 days later, I caught Greg trying to move money out of our joint savings account. I saw the alert on my phone while I was reconciling invoices for a client. When I asked him what he was doing, he didn't even try to hide it. "I'm buying a watch," he said, "for the gala next month." "With our savings?" I asked. "You don't need a vote on this," he snapped. "You and your dad are just leeches holding me back." I went still. Really still. That scared him less than tears ever would have, because he mistook silence for surrender. "Fine," I said. "Do what you want." He smirked. "That's more like it." But I didn't cry after he left the room. I opened my desk drawer. I took out folders, bank records, mortgage papers, tax files. I started making copies. That night I packed one suitcase and slid it into the back of my closet. I smiled when I needed to. I nodded when he talked. Inside, I was done. 3 months earlier, a piece of mail had come addressed from an old law office my family knew well. Greg had picked it up first, glanced at the return label, and tossed it into the trash. "Probably another boring estate thing from your people," he said. He forgot I noticed everything. After he left for work, I pulled it out, smoothed the envelope, and hid it in my desk. I didn't open it right away. Part of me was afraid it was nothing. Part of me was afraid it was something. It turned out to be both. My grandfather had not just been a mechanic with grease under his nails and a talent for fixing things nobody else could save. He had quietly bought commercial real estate over decades. Small parcels first, then bigger ones. Smart deals, patient deals. He never bragged about any of it. When he died, the prime land under Greg's company headquarters was left in a trust to my father and me. What they didn't know was I had a plan they never saw coming. The letter mentioned a review date for the land lease and asked me to contact the family attorney. I finally did. That was how Mr. Henderson stepped back into my life. He was in his 70s, sharp as broken glass, and still wore the same plain ties he'd worn since I was a kid. He knew my grandfather. He knew my father. And he had no patience for men who thought expensive shoes made them important. We met in his office 2 towns over. The place smelled like old paper, coffee, and polished wood. He read every document I brought him, then took off his glasses and said, "Your husband is either reckless, arrogant, or stupid." "Can he be all 3?" I asked. Mr. Henderson smiled. "Yes." He explained the trust, the lease, the rights attached to the property, and exactly how exposed Greg's company would be if the lease were terminated at the next legal opening. "Can we do that?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Legally? Yes. Cleanly, too." I thought about the clock shattered in the grass. I thought about my father being called a beggar on my porch. "Then let's do it," I said. We drafted the paperwork in silence, except for the scratch of his pen and the ticking of the clock on his wall. At home, Greg became more unbearable by the day. He posted photos of cufflinks, champagne tastings, and rehearsals for the company gala, writing captions about leadership and vision like he'd built the world with his bare hands. Meanwhile, he tossed his shirts at me for ironing and asked if I'd managed not to embarrass him with my face around his colleagues. I let him talk. I let him believe he had me cornered. Every cruel word made it easier. The gala was his big night. He practiced his speech in the mirror while adjusting ties he couldn't afford. He had no idea the trap had already been set beneath them, polished floor he was so proud to stand on. On the night of the gala, I got dressed slowly. Not for Greg, for me. I wore a black dress I'd bought years before and never had the nerve to put on around his family, because I knew they'd say I was trying too hard. I did my makeup, pinned my hair back, and looked at myself without apology. Then I went to pick up my father. He was waiting in a tailored charcoal suit Mr. Henderson had insisted on buying for him, though my dad argued about the price all afternoon. When he opened the door, I smiled for the first time in weeks. "You look handsome," I said. He laughed. "I feel like I'm headed to court or prom." "Maybe both," I said. The gala was all crystal lights, polished marble, and fake warmth. Servers carried tiny, perfect food on silver trays, while investors and executives laughed too loudly. Greg was on stage when we entered, one hand on the podium, the other moving like he was blessing the room with his brilliance. "Our expansion plans will redefine this company's future," he was saying. Then he saw us. He stopped mid-sentence. His face changed so fast it was almost funny. "What is he doing here?" Greg said into the microphone. The room turned. Every head, every whisper. He stepped away from the podium and pointed. "Security, remove that beggar before he ruins this event." My father didn't flinch. Neither did I. I walked straight toward the stage, heels clicking across the floor, and before Greg could stop me, I took the spare microphone from the stand beside the podium. "No," I said clearly. "I don't think so." Greg hissed, "Chloe, have you lost your mind?" "No," I said. "I just found it." The room went still. Even the server stopped moving. I pulled the legal envelope from my clutch and held it up. "You called my father a beggar in our home," I said. "You shoved him, threw away the gift he made with his own hands, and acted like he was dirt on your shoe." Greg reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't touch me." Then I handed him the notice. He looked confused first, then pale. "What is this?" he asked. "Read it," I said. He scanned the page. "This is a mistake." I turned to the room. My voice was cold now, steady. "No mistake. The land under this company headquarters belongs to my family trust, to my father and me. And because of Greg's actions, and because respect matters, the lease is being terminated. A wave of sound rippled through the room. Gasps, sharp whispers, a dropped glass somewhere near the back. Greg stared at me. "You can't do this." "Actually," came a voice behind us, "she can." Mr. Henderson stepped forward from the front table, where he had been seated with calm patience all night. He took the microphone from Greg's limp hand and said, "I'm counsel for the trust. The notice is valid. Effective immediately, expansion plans are suspended pending full legal review." Greg looked like he might faint. His boss shot up from his chair. "Greg," he barked, "what have you done?" Greg pointed at my father like a child. "He never said anything." My dad finally spoke. "You never asked." Greg's mouth opened, then shut. I looked him right in the face. "You didn't throw out a beggar," I said. "You threw out the man whose family owns the ground beneath your feet." Silence. Then his boss stormed the stage, snatched the papers, and began shouting for legal and finance. Greg tried to explain, tried to blame me, tried to say this was a private marital issue, but nobody cared. Not anymore. The image was broken, and once that kind of man loses the image, he has nothing left to hide behind. My father offered me his arm. I took it. We walked out together while Greg stammered into the microphone, and investors stared at him like he was a live wire sparking in the rain. Outside, the night air felt clean, real. I breathed in deep. My father looked at me and said, "You okay?" I nodded. Now I am. The fallout came fast. Greg lost his job within a week for putting the company at risk and failing to disclose critical property information tied to the expansion. The luxury car he loved posting online got repossessed a month later. The watch never got bought. The house had to be sold during the divorce, and Greg ended up moving back into his mother's basement, where she could tell him whose fault everything was. I didn't stay to listen. I rebuilt my life with numbers, peace, and people who didn't confuse cruelty with class. My father and I never replaced the broken clock. He said some things are better left as reminders. He was right. Because now I know true wealth was never the suit, the speech, or the watch Greg wanted on his wrist. True wealth is how you treat the people who gave you everything when they had almost nothing. If your partner or their family ever disrespected the people who raised you, you know exactly how much that burns. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. No one should ever be made to feel ashamed of their roots.